Welcome back, everyone. Mike McConville here one more time for String Tech. I've shipped out a few more of these neck surgery kits. This one's going to Mario in Connecticut. And I thought it's been a while since I've done a full tutorial on the neck surgery process. You know, I remember years ago when I first came out with this idea of putting splines in, how much outrage there was in the community. When you fast forward to now, just about everybody's doing splines. Why? Because it works. This was glued up with hide glue. The actual wood was warm and the glue was hot. One of many wonderful things about hide glue is it doesn't stick to the finish. After it dries, you can just flake it right off. Now we're going to be putting a whole new overlay on the face of this headstock, but let me flip this over and show you the other side. You can see how tight we got that joint, and the hide glue just kind of chips right off, nice and clean. So for the sake of Mario and the other guys that got their neck surgery kits in this last few weeks, if you go on the McConville Guitars blog and you scroll down on the landing page, you'll come to a link that has, I believe, 12 or 14 videos on various guitars that I've done neck surgery over the last 20 years. But I thought it is time to start fresh, because there's a few things that I've maybe changed over that 20 years in my approach. So I will once again take the time to show you how I'm doing this job and why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. One of the issues you run into with regular sort of carpenter's glue, aliphatic glue, is it's too thick for this job. I had thinned those original coats down to like a water consistency, super thin, and that allowed the glue to wick right into those wood fibers. In order to adjust the depth of the router bit, I use this indexing pin in the sled and look through the windows, and this gives me a cross-sectional view of the sweep of the cutter. I make that adjustment with the indexing pin before I mount the router on the sled. Now that we've determined the proper depth of cut, then I adjust the depth of the router bit with a straight edge. In this case, it's just a piece of mahogany. I lay it across the base of the sled and just match that depth. Now we can remove the indexing pin. We no longer need it because we know exactly how deep we're going. So when you take into account each spline has 3 7-inch long grain to long grain surfaces. The floor of that elliptical dado and both walls are long grain to long grain contact. The only short grain is the last little bit right here where it's 1/8 of an inch deep. You've got short grain to short grain. Tried to explain this in other videos, but I'll explain it again. If you just plunge route, like you drop a router bit in there and you move 2 inches and you pull it back up, well, the problem with that is at each end of that biscuit, because it's not an elliptical spline, it's just a biscuit, at each end of that biscuit, you've got short grain to short grain contact. So for the non-woodworkers, I'll explain it like this. If I was to try and glue those two ends together, that would be end grain to end grain contact. Like these splines, if I do this, that is long grain to long grain contact. So with those two splines, you got 3 times 7, 21 inches of contact, 7 inches on each wall, 7 inches on the floor. So with those two splines, you have 42 inches of long grain to long grain contact, and that's why I've never had one of these things break. So I'll let that set overnight and check it tomorrow morning. All of the latest guys that have their neck surgery kits, there's a bunch of things I want to point out. I did not mention it yet in this video, but I have mentioned it in some of the previous videos. Leave those splines flat on top so that you can clamp them into place. Don't round them off or shape them ahead of time. Well, watch again how easily that hide glue just chips right off, right down to the lacquer line. Gotta love it. So 613 at the cuff, 590 at the tip. Now I'll take the Dynabraid to this and bring it right down. We're going to be putting a maple overlay. So another couple of tips for you guys that are just getting started with this. This is an old Les Paul nut from my junk box. I'm using that as a spacer, and I'm also using that to check this angle here to make sure that it goes in tight. Now, with a very sharp pencil, I am going to trace the underside of this for the exact measurement. So I'm following that pencil line I just scribed. So this will be our final tracing. We definitely got to get it right this time. I left this top of the headstock because obviously it's the most complex shape to deal with. Let's have a look at what we got. I am bringing you in tight to show you how much overhang I left on this maple faceplate. So I'm going to pare that back flush now. And this allows me to have the guitar, like I said, straight up and down. So when I'm doing the final shaping on the top of the headstock, which is the trickiest part of the job, I've got it right up to nose level. One of my subscribers, this was a few years ago, I had done a video on edge dressing a maple Strat fingerboard, and he had mentioned that he uses Scotch tape, which is ultra thin, and that's what I'm using here. So I've wrapped that sanding tube in 600 grit paper. There is our 1000 grit. Well, before this goes out to the shop for finishing, there's a couple other things I wanted to point out. I've tried my best not to burn through the color coat. You can see right here that I have burned through a little bit, and right here. But for the most part, I've just flushed the splines down to the clear coat. This is the first time I've actually done a stop cut on this end. The first person I saw do that was Steve Curtis in Manchester, and I've seen a couple other guys do that since. Here I did a through cut, and it stops, as you can see, just at the machine heads. So the idea of this spline is it starts well before the initial break point and goes well beyond that break point. Let's have a look at the other side. There is our finished quarter sawn curly maple overlay. It's going to be painted black, so nobody will ever know whether it's curly or not, except you guys. And that's our finished truss rod cavity. I have a Les Paul nut in place. It's not glued, but it's just there as a filler to fill that space while he's spraying the black onto the maple.